What's up everybody, welcome back to the channel. We're going to be doing a build series for the Traxxas / two-wheel drive unassembled kits. This is going to be broken down into a little mini part series, that way the video is not overdrawn and 2 hours long for you guys. So hit that subscribe button, hit the bell next to it, that way you're getting notifications when all the new videos come out. Feel free to follow along on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for some behind the scenes photos and updates and stuff like that. Blah, blah, blah. I'm talking too much. Without further ado, let's get to it. What's up everybody? Welcome back to the Slash Kit build from Traxxas. Today, this time, we are working on the front suspension, so you're going to need your front suspension bag, as well as the front shocks that we built in the first video. So if you haven't seen that, go ahead and check out the rest of the build series. I'm assuming if you made it this far, you've been watching along. But this is going to be part B in the manual, and that takes place from page 17 to 22. And then the front module assembly, so everything for the front assembly that's going to get bolted right to the chassis. So when we are done, we're going to have something that looks like that. Hey guys, got a new merch store available with some hats, shirts, and other accessories. So if you want to pick up some cool swag and support the channel, go ahead and click that link in the description below. So, first things first, let's get this bag opened up, get all the parts out and situated that we're well organized and ready to get the build going. So, first step is going to be starting kind of right in the center of the whole front suspension. You can start with your bulkhead here. And your body posts and everything. So let's get these body posts mounted up. So you're going to need your posts, cross brace, and then some 3x8 screws. So these are just going to get bolted right up, and then obviously you're going to have your hole there for the pin to go through. So you're going to want to line that up. Typically front to back is how we do it. On the front, since there's that cowling on the body, going sideways doesn't necessarily make it that easy to get the pin in and out. So if you just line these up front to back and then tighten them down, you should be pretty set. Got that all set to go. That's going to get mounted to the front shock tower. Not really going to matter what step you do this in. You can either put the shock tower on the bulkhead first or mount your shock tower or body post to the shock tower. 3x10 screws with the giant head on them, just like your motor mount screws that you did in the past. And you'll want to pay attention to the orientation on these, so it shows you which holes to go into in the manual. So definitely pay attention to that. You don't want to put them in the wrong holes for sure. Those on there, and then you should have it. So those are the holes. As you can see, you've got the roll of holes on the bottom, and then you've got the one up. You're going to use the one up on both sides. Then we can get this guy mounted to the bulkhead, which is some 3x15 screws. So you're only going to be able to get the tower in there one way where the holes are actually going to line up. So basically, you're going in from the same direction that you did the body posts. Use your 3x15 screws and tighten those down. And it should look like that. Going in from the back side here, this is going to be the front of the truck, so it's going to be facing that way. Now you're going to get your longer screws with the giant head on them. And then these are going to mount your camber links. And saw my last video, you saw me talk about this notch or marking. So you can see how part of it's got that line in it. You always want that to the left side of the vehicle. So if you do all of your rods the same way to the left with that marking, all your adjustments when you go to adjust your camber or your toe is going to have the same effects. Instead of turning one clockwise and one counterclockwise, so you get the same effect, you know what I mean? So make sure you're orientating them the right way. And then Traxxas in the manual is going to give you this diagram here so you can match up, because you got the two different lengths. So you've got your long ones and your short ones. The short ones should be your camber lengths, the longer ones are going to be your toe length. So set the long ones aside, get both of your short ones, and then make sure you're orientating, like I said, with that marking to the left. So if you lay them out like that, everything should be good, and then we can go ahead and bolt them on. And there's only one hole for these, so pretty hard to get confused. There's only one hole on the tower that those are gonna mate up with. And then you wanna keep in mind that there's two different size hollow balls. So it's a smaller hollow ball that gets put on the inside here on the tower. So you've got your link. There we go. So you've got your link. You can see the shallow ball there. And then on this side you've got the wider ball. It's the shallow ball, the narrower one that goes in on the tower. And again, just make sure they're nice and free. You don't want any binding on any of your suspension parts, so you always want to make sure you don't over tighten any of that. You want them nice and free moving, so we don't get any unwanted binding in the suspension that's going to cause weird behavior from it. So this might be the worst part of the build. You've got the two inner rods here that are going to hold your control arms on, and these parts actually use the old style E-clips, which can be a little bit of a pain. So you're definitely going to want some pliers, and then just take your time with them. Don't try to push it on there if it's a little cockeyed or anything, because it can kind of spring load it and then fly off, and you end up losing the clip. So go ahead and get both of your both of the rods, and then put a clip on one end of each of them. You can go ahead and put that clip on before we go any further. Just on one end though, don't do both ends, but it'll snap on into that groove. Not really the easiest way to do it. It's just take your time and make sure you're not forcing it and causing it to pop off and fly in a certain direction. So just line it up and then click it on. Don't do what I just did. So you've got both your pins with an E-clip just on one end of them, and then we can use that to slide everything through and then lock it in. Now these arms, these aren't like the rear arms where they were left and right. These are more of a universal, so they'll work on either side. Just make sure you have them facing the proper direction with your lower shock mounting holes on the front side of the vehicle. So as long as you got that, everything should be set. And then they also use this fiberglass tie bar up front for a little added rigidity, just to strengthen it. So you can actually put that on both your pins, like so, and then slide your pins from the front on both sides at the same time through your arm, through your bulkhead, and then all the way through. Should line up and go out the other side. When they're sticking out the other side, you can actually do the clip on the back side now, so you're gonna have to get a clip on both of those pins just like you did the other ones. It's gonna be a little bit more difficult just because it's already mounted to the body or to the bulkhead. So just take your time, use your pliers if you need to, get them on there. They give you a little pointer in the manual, but not always the easiest thing to do. So this is probably the most frustrating part of the build. Everything else has been pretty straightforward. Maybe that's why they pre-built the shocks, because they felt bad for you that we had to use but still. Definitely don't want these flying off because I'm looking through all the screws and stuff here. They don't give you any extras of these unless there's some in that extra parts bin, but definitely don't want to lose these. If you do, you're going to the hobby shop to buy a pack of their Traxxas part number 1633. Don't ask me why I know that, but that's got their assortment of all these extra clips in it. So if you do lose one, and you need more, Traxxas part number 1633 will get you what you need. Alright, got those on. Frustrating part, consider that over. Definitely want to move your arms, make sure they're moving freely. That one does. This one's binding a little bit, so I can actually see a little bit of material where they cut it off of the runners when it was molded. So I'm just going to get my knife in there, kind of take some of that material off so it's not rubbing. And that should free it up a little bit. Just be careful, you're using a knife, so don't cut yourself. Take a little bit off, it's not going to take much. There we go, nice and freed up again, the way it should be. Now that we got that done, we can start building the front caster block and hub assembly. So you got your caster block and your steering block. Your steering blocks, these guys here, are universal. So those will work on left or right. Your caster blocks, however, which are these guys, I don't know if you're gonna be able to see on there, but they have an L and an R on them. So you're gonna wanna pay attention to orientation on those. Definitely have a right side versus a left side. So something to pay attention to when you're building them. But right here you can see in the manual it's going to show the right side and the left side. So you definitely want to make sure you're paying attention to the orientation. But first we're going to get the bearings in the bearing carriers or the steering blocks. And make sure they're seated all the way. They can be a little tight, so make sure they're seated in there properly. You don't want to binding up the drivetrain at all because they weren't seated properly. To get the bearings in, you're going to have your axles, and again with the PTFE washers. So you got one on each side of the axle. So if you go ahead and slide one onto the axle, do both of them since we're building two, and then you can slide the axle through. And it's going to slide through on the part where the angle is curved on the steering block. And then once you slide it through, you're going to slide another washer over it. And then just like we did in the previous video for the rear axles, you're going to have your pin that goes through, and then your hex is going to snap kind of onto that. This is the front end, so these hexes are a little different than the rear hexes. They're a little wider, but that gives you the proper offset for your front versus your rear. And then just like the rear in the previous video, they're going to snap on, so you can hear the snap. Push them firmly, they'll snap on, line up the groove. So you've got a groove in the hex that's cut for the pin, so that'll actually made up with the pin, and then that's what it's snapping onto. Snap, crackle, pop. So right, left. And these are important that you get these in the right way, otherwise you're going to be limited on your steering and you're going to wonder why you don't have full steering. But basically just line it up like the picture shows you here with your right versus your left. And then you've got your long screw pins here with the fine thread on them. There are two different side loops, so you definitely need the longer of the two for these ones. So pick out the two long ones, put the two shorter ones aside. Those are for the next step. So the two long pins are what you're going to use, and you're going to go up from the bottom and then slide it all the way through the steering block, and then line it up with the top hole on the caster block. And once that's done, you can thread it in and tighten it up. And make sure everything's nice and free. Don't over tighten that bolt. You don't want to do that because then you'll bind up your steering and cause more stress on your servo, which you don't want to do. The servos are under enough stress as it is. Rinse and repeat for the other side. Just make sure you're orientating it in the proper direction since it's the left side versus the right side. Nice and free. Those are all set. And then with those built, we can bring the front end back into it. And then we're going to end up using these screw pins and getting everything mounted to the chassis. So we're going to mount everything on the lower end first, and then we'll link it up with the camber link on the top end. So use those shorter screw pins that you set aside, and then use those on the bottom here. Slide them through just like we did for the steering block. Slide them through and then thread them in. And again, making sure you don't over tighten them because you don't want to cause any extra problems in the system. That way the suspension can do what the suspension needs to do. So just snug them up, make sure everything is free. Alright, nice and smooth. And then you've got two of your M3 nuts that we need, as well as two 3x18 screws, which are those guys. And then these are what we're going to use to mount the camber link. So that is going to mount up to the top of the caster block here. So put the screw through the back side, and then once that's all the way in, you're going to secure it with a nut on the other side. To lock everything in, and that way it can't back out on its own. You definitely don't want that backing out. And once you got both of those screws in, just go ahead and do your nut on the back side. You'll probably need a driver in the screw and then a nut driver on the nut to fully tighten them down. Otherwise you'll start tightening up the nut and it will just back out the screw. So use your driver and your nut driver and tighten both those nuts down, making sure they're nice and tight. These are nylon lock nuts, so they shouldn't back out under use while you're driving the truck. So as long as they're tight now, they should stay and pretty much not go anywhere forever unless you take them off. Set that aside for 1 minute because we got to start working on the steering rack. So you've got all these three pieces here are for your steering assembly. This is what's going to build the rack that translates the steering servo movement into turning the wheels. So you definitely want to pay attention to the order stuff. You got a lot of use of the PTFE washers and everything, so definitely make sure you didn't use any of those. Looks like you need 4 total. You got these little white bushings that they're using instead of a ball bearing. So those are going to go into the steering rack too, and then you've got some other washers that are going to go on top, and then you've got your 3x30. They're the only screws in the bag that aren't fully threaded, so you can see the non-threaded part there. These are the screws you need to mount the bell cranks to the skid plate. That's what they're going to pivot on. So we want to go ahead and put all these bushings in the openings, making sure they're pushed in all the way. If they're not, they're going to cause resistance in it, and that's going to put more stress on your steering servo. So you want to make sure those bushings are pressed in all the way. They're not too tight, so it should be fairly easy. Shouldn't take much force. And then we definitely want to make sure we're paying attention to orientation. We've got 2 different cranks here, so you want to make sure you're orientating it the proper way. So we're going to put 2 PTFE washers on each post. 2 on the right, 2 on the left. And then we can place our bell cranks down on it. Again, making sure they're orientated the the right way. And that way everything works together. And then you've got 2 of these small 3mm washers that go on top, which may or may not have a little post to sit on. Put them on the screws. So if you put the washer on the screw and then the screw through, you're not going to worry about losing the washer. And then you can go ahead and tighten these down, again making sure that they are not fully tight. So you want the free movement here. You don't want any extra resistance in the system, because that's just going to translate into stress on the servo, and we definitely don't want any added stress on the servo, because the servos have enough to deal with. They don't need any extra stress. So just snug these up. Run them the rest of the way in by hand. And we still have free movement, but everything is secure on there. Alright, so these need to get linked together. I forgot to put the drag link in. That's my bad.
There it is, hidden. I'm not missing anything.
But you've got these 2, which are Phillips head. So I need to go grab a Phillips driver real quick. But these are 2 that are going to put your drag link on. So they've got the shoulder on the screw there, so the drag link can pivot but still be secured to the bell cranks. So give me 1 minute. I'm going to go grab a Phillips and I will be right back.
A few moments later.
All right, Phillips head. Now that we're fully prepared, let's get this. So you've got the 2 holes on your bell cranks. It's going to be the inner holes for the drag link. The outer holes are what your steering link's actually going to bolt to translate it to the wheels. So we definitely want to get this on there properly. Shouldn't matter what side is up or down on your drag link. But you do need to put this in and then put, you can use one of the washers on the bottom side of the screw before you put it onto the bell crank itself. So make sure you don't forget that washer. It's very important. It's what's going to help keep the steering nice and free and from keep it from binding up. So you definitely want to make sure that washer's on there. And then, as with everything else I've been talking about, don't over tighten it. Everything's nice and free moving, not binding. Then we can go ahead and put this back on there. Now that I'm not missing any steps. Bound to skip 1 step while you're doing a build. Just a given, right? I'm allowed 1 goof. So no more goofs, I've already used it. All right. Now moving on, we can do our toe links, which are our steering links. So those are going to be the 2 longer links that you set aside earlier. They're again going to be orientated with the notch to the left of the vehicle. That way we're keeping everything consistent. We've got some 3x18 screws for both sides, plus you've got the M3 nuts going on both sides. So, all your screws and nuts ready, and then we can start putting them in. I am gonna put probably the inners on first. I feel like that might be easier. We gotta get into the bell cranks, and we're a little limited on space. We can do that first. You put the screw through the bell crank. You can just screw it in through that hole all the way up, and then the link is actually gonna sit on top. Very tight plastic. Just be careful when the plastic's that tight. Obviously you don't want to go crazy with the amount of pressure you're putting on it, because you don't want to crack the plastic. So go easy on it. If it is that tight and you have some of that grease laying around, you can put a little bit of grease on the threads. That'll help the screw go through there a little easier. Didn't seem to be forcing it too hard on that one, so I didn't worry about it. But pro tip there, put some grease on it. And you're gonna wanna put the camber link over the screw, and then you're gonna have a nut to tighten down onto that. So I'm gonna get both these started, and then I'll tighten both of them down after I get both of the nuts on. And these are again nylon locking nuts, so they shouldn't really back out on you. So you really shouldn't have to have a problem or worrying about that. Snug those all up, that way everything still works freely. The inside toe link mount like this on the bell crank can be a little bit annoying just because you've got the shock tower and everything in the way, so finding the right angle to get your drivers on there to work properly. But we managed. So we got those on, now we got to do the outers. The outers are going to be the same deal, screws in through the bottom on the steering block, and then you'll have the nut to capture the camber link on the top side of it. So I'm going to go ahead and run these screws through the bottom side, which shouldn't be as tight as the inner, that white plastic they use for the bell cranks. Tends to be a little tight. And then we can slide our links over and capture it with the nut. And then we'll tighten down the nut to keep everything secure. I think I grabbed the wrong screw. Pay attention, because this one wasn't, the nut barely went down on it, so it made me notice that I had the wrong size screw. So we're just gonna change that out real quick. This is why we double check things. There we go, now everything's good. We got steering function and everything. Putting the steering link on. So this other guy here, which is just the fully threaded, you don't have the center adjustment like you do on your camber and toe link. This is just the steering link, so this is gonna link it from the steering bell crank, which is on the truck, to the steering servo, which is also on the truck, but it's the actual part that turns the wheels. So I'm gonna go ahead and mount the servo horn, servo saver. So there's actually a spring inside this, which when you hit the front end or you hit the front wheels or something, and it sends a shock through the system, instead of sending that shock to the steering servo, it actuates the spring in here. But this is the actual piece that is going to mount to the servo, so we got to get this mounted up onto the truck. And then we are going to put the screw up through the bottom, the link through the servo saver, and then capture it with a nut driver and your hex driver, and just tighten this nut down. And then later on, when we put the servo in the car, the servo saver will actually get hooked up to the servo, and we'll go from there. And then for the other end, just go down with your 3x12 screw and then into the last remaining hole on the bell crank. No nut involved on this one, just straight into the plastic. It's going to self-thread. Run that up, make sure everything rotates freely. And then that portion of it is done. We got the steering link on there, ready to mount to the chassis and hook up to the servo at the proper time. Now we need to mount the front bumper, which I think is all we have left. So we've got the 4 screws here on your bumper. You're going to use these big M4 screws, and those are going to mount to the 4 holes on the bulkhead there. So always start with one, keep it loose, just line everything up. There's no guide pins or anything on this, so you just got to line them up with the screws. Get all 4 in loosely, and then you can start tightening them up one at a time. Alright, front bumper is on. And then lastly, we've got some missing screws, methinks. I've got 2 screws to mount the shocks. Where's my other screws? How lovely of Traxxas. Let me just Just move some stuff around, make sure I'm not missing anything. Well, Traxxas strikes again. Well, I shouldn't say again, they haven't done anything wrong yet.
At last, we meet for the first time for the last time.
I've got the 2 lower shock mounting screws. I am missing the upper mounting screws. So we're gonna get to where we can with that, and then hopefully in one of the other bags later on in the build there might be some extra screws, or they're just missing and I get to call Traxxas and have them send me some screws. But we will get as far as we can. So I've got the 3x15s, which are the lower mounting screws. I'm missing the 3x14s, but basically you're gonna have one mount on the top, one option on that, which is the shock tower right here, and then you do have 2 positions on the lower there. You've got your inner and your outer. They're telling you to use position 1, which is the inner, so more of a vertical alignment on the shocks. So we're gonna do that real quick. Just get that lined up, and at least in the lowers today, and we can kind of go from there. Hopefully get the extra screws there. Alright, well that's as far as we're gonna get without those upper screws. But there's your front module assembly. Obviously these would be screwed in had I had the screws. But you got your bumper and everything all together with your steering bell cranks. So voila! That was portion D of the manual, building the front module assembly. Thanks for watching. I hope that made things a little easier for you. If you were having questions about the build or you just like following along, hey, why not? Subscribe if you haven't already. We're going to finish up this build probably in the next video, which is the chassis and electronics, and just kind of adding the wheels and stuff like that. So hopefully these missing screws appear in one of the other bags. If they don't, I'm going to call Traxxas and have them send me some, or go through go through my stuff and just see if I have screws I can put in there in the meantime to get this thing all buttoned up. But thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, and as always, I will see you in the next one. My due diligence skipped a step, so we're going to take that back off real quick. This is why you pay attention. Probably link those bell cranks together, right? With the drag link. You think that's kind of important? It needs to be done before this is on.